Hey, can we talk about your friendships? I mean, how are your friendships making you better? How do the people you spend the most time with help you become the person you most want to be? And is anyone doing that for you? Or are you doing that for anyone else? Hey, before we try to wrestle with all of that, first, let me say welcome. I mean, this is Journeying Home. My name is Jarrod, and it's really good to have you drop in and spend some time with us. We're a community where we're working to make it simple for you to follow Jesus and live a better life. And we hope you'll make it a regular part of your week to drop in here. Spend some time with us. So hit that subscribe button and the bell for notifications, put it on your calendar, and as you keep coming back, we hope you'll take some of the things we're all learning to thrive in your own life, because we're all trying to live a better life, and we think better begins right here, right now. So think about the person you most want to be. You may want to be a better parent to your kids. You may want to be more generous with your time and money. You may want to be more confident in your job. You may want to have a stronger faith in God, but be more grateful, or become the kind of person who always does the wise thing. I mean, have that best you in mind now. I mean, think about this. Do the friendships you have encourage you and help you move toward being that person you want to be? That's not something we think about all that often, but our connections with other people, they have a lot of impact on the kind of person we become. But we're not very intentional with our friendships sometimes. I mean, I know I'm not. Friends are friends. And if you're anything like me, I've had several moments in the past few months where I've thought or said something like this to a friend. Hey, we should do dinner sometime, but I never followed up and made plans. Or I thought, I wish we had time to just hang out with those people more often, but never said no to the other things that were filling up my calendar. And most of the time, I'm just not very intentional spending time with the very people who most encourage and support me in becoming the best me. Recent research tells us that compared to 50 years ago, adults are now spending 20% more time alone. And maybe that's not a terrible thing, but it does tell you about how we spend our time has changed. And among millennials and Gen Z, research shows that time spent with friends has decreased by 70% in the last 20 years, all while social media has become a mainstay in our daily lives. And I'm not here to make Facebook and Instagram out to be bad guys, but they're definitely a double-edged sword. I mean, we can be connected to so many friends and family members, and yet we're still not quite getting the kind of connection we really need. And it's having a major impact on our health. The Surgeon General put out an advisory last year that being poorly connected socially increases your risk for heart disease, stroke, and developing dementia as you age. Oh, wow. Ouch. Your risk premature death goes up by 60%. Research tells us that even before the COVID pandemic, Americans have been experiencing historically high levels of feeling isolated, invisible, and insignificant. That's 1 in 2 Americans who feel that way. And here's what we all know about feeling isolated, invisible, and insignificant. If we all feel isolated, we won't seek out the valuable feedback we can get from other people. So when it comes to our finances, or the way we respond to pressure at work with our bosses, or the way we handle tension at home with our kids or spouses, without some outside perspective from friends who can help us see what we can't see in those situations, we end up making decisions based on our own little perspective. And sometimes our own perspective is skewed by our emotions, or limited understanding, or limited experience. And so we make unwise choices that later create chaos in our lives. Or if we feel invisible, we may start to compromise our integrity or cross boundaries and do pretty much whatever it takes to get someone's attention. Even if we get the attention of people who don't have our best interests in mind, we think, well, that's better than nobody seeing me. And out of that need for attention comes more chaos. And when we feel insignificant, it affects our self-worth. We'll stop looking for God's purpose in our life because we just can't believe He would have anything for us. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that the loving God who created us designed human beings with the need for a meaningful community. In fact, this relational design is a reflection of God Himself. In Genesis 1, God is creating everything and He's bringing order to the world. And if you go back and read this creation story, you can notice how God brings order to the chaos of the world. And He doesn't just randomly throw the world together. I mean, He puts the sun and moon and stars into a certain pattern. And He creates a variety of plants and animals that end up reproducing those same kinds of plants and animals. And you don't have dolphins birthing starfish randomly. There's an order to all of this creation. And the oceans and rivers have boundaries, and even the water vapor and clouds in the sky have boundaries. And each day, God says that what He created is good. And the same is true when it comes to the way God created human beings. Here's what Genesis 1:26 and 27 say about it. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. The order that God brings to the creation of human beings is unique. We are created in God's likeness. We are designed to reflect God in how we live, how we treat others, how we build families and communities and businesses. We're like a mirror, reflecting God into the world around us. To fully thrive in our lives, we must live in a way that reflects who God is. And one of the major ways we reflect God's image is found in this description. God says, "Let us." See, God exists as an example of ideal community. He is three individual persons, but only one God. This identity of a triune God, or perhaps you've heard God referred to as a Trinity, this idea that God is somehow one and three at the same time, highlights for us that we were created to reflect that kind of community. I mean, that's not the only way we reflect God's image, but it's a major way in which order is created for us. Like, community prevents chaos. So much so that the first problem God mentions is not actually sin. I mean, Genesis 2:18 says this, "The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone." In other words, isolation. Mankind at the core of who we are is meant to live in community. Isolation is chaos for us. So when Jesus begins teaching, you can see Him emphasizing this whole idea. When Jesus is teaching about what makes life good, He uses family-oriented language. He teaches us to call God our Father when we pray, and He tells stories that put God in the role of a father. He says that when we begin to trust Him, that He calls us His brothers and sisters. In fact, there's a story that Matthew tells where Jesus is standing in a crowd talking, and someone comes up and says, "Hey, Jesus, your mom and brothers are outside waiting to speak with you." And Jesus replies that the people who follow Him are His mother and brothers and sisters. Jesus wasn't disowning His family. He was just elevating this idea that He came to establish a new kind of family called the church. And just like your family, this new family you become a part of doesn't always share the same interests, political views, or want to spend the time doing the same things as you do all the time. But for 3 years while Jesus was preaching and teaching, He didn't just talk about it. He chose to spend time with 12 disciples, and He modeled living in community when He could have just done it all by Himself. His central message was built on modeling the kind of community that had this kind of familial connection at the core. And even more than that, for those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus and are a part of His family, He instructs us to treat one another this way, in this deeper, more loving and connected way. Jesus said this as recorded by His friend John, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And Jesus literally laid down His life for His friends. He showed us what love does for one another. So let me ask you again, are you taking intentional, consistent steps to connecting to a community, like what Jesus modeled? I mean, I get it. You've got work friends, and country club friends, and party friends, and lake buddies, and gym bros, and let's go have dinner friends. But be honest right now. Many of your connections and relationships are practical, functional, and transactional. They're the kind of relationships that function with this idea, if you help me, I'll help you, or if you don't, then I'll get by on my own. But that's not the kind of community that Jesus was talking about. You may have lots of good connections that meet some surface needs, which seems really efficient for you, but is that sufficient? It takes intentionality and sacrifice to have the kind of community that we were designed for. And here's what I mean by that. You will have to give up putting time into something else in order to put time into these kinds of relationships. You'll have to stop doing something else so you can develop regular, consistent times where you spend time with people who are moving in the direction you want to move, who value what you value, and who are pursuing better where you want to be better. The best place to find those kinds of relationships is in the family of God, with people who keep pursuing a life like the one Jesus modeled for us. Those are the people He said were His family. Not perfect people or people just like me and their hobbies or political views or people who have it all figured out, but people who are committed to finding the kind of connection, purpose, and significance that can only come from following Jesus. Do you have the kind of people around you who are committed to the kind of connecting and community that meets the deep needs that God created in you? The alternative is to settle for efficiency and transactional connections, practical, functional, transactional things. They meet a few needs, but they're not transformational, nor do they help you thrive in life. Those kinds of relationships don't help you become all God created you to be. They're not encouraging you to love God and love others more. They just keep you chasing what's convenient. And as you already know, those kinds of relationships eventually lead to chaos. Not intentionally, but because your deepest needs are never engaged in the kind of community you were created for, chaos starts to sneak into life. So this week, will you take a step toward the kind of community that helps you thrive? This isn't about dumping all your friends. This is just about being intentional with your time and spending your time with the people who will help you be more loving, more generous, better at serving others, better at making wise decisions. Do you feel isolated, invisible, or insignificant? I mean, your first response is probably to stay away from people, but that's not what's best. This is an opportunity to trust God, not your feelings. Take a step of faith. Trust God to help you find the kind of family Jesus was talking about. You might simply get together with a friend or some friends this week. What friend do you want more time with? Who, after talking with you, do you always feel more energized and encouraged by? Like, take that person to coffee or lunch or invite them over for dinner and then work to make that a regular rhythm. Do you need some new connections? Take the step to serve on a team or out in the community. Commit to serving on a consistent basis and you'll begin to develop a deeper friendship with people who are also giving their lives to a bigger purpose. Here at Journey, we truly believe that our communities should be better because our church is a part of them. And this problem of meaningful connection is no exception. We can offer a solution to what people are experiencing. We can help people find the connection, purpose, and significance they need to thrive in their everyday lives. And that's how Jesus designed His church, for us to be the kind of people who offer a place for those things to be found. Because all of us were created for community. God created each of us in His image, and we need one another to thrive in our lives. It's just not an option. It's not a bonus or a sidebar. It's a necessity to good life.